I am the, got it. I am the Fairfax County PTA Secretary. We're going to start with just, the usual Zoom spiel. Please, everyone be on mute during the training, but we do want to hear from you. So if you have a comment during the training, please put it in the chat. Kara is going to be handling the chat, and we will have a question and answer session when the training is done. Raise your hand, please, during the question and answer session, and we will call on you. And please be the only one who is not on mute when you are asking a question. Everybody else, please be on mute. So I'm going to introduce myself. Like I said, I am the Fairfax County PTA Secretary. I just came off of a term of secretary for my local PTA, Eagleview Elementary School. I am now the president-elect there. I am an engineer by trade. And this is my first training video. So if I seem a little bit awkward or I take too many uncomfortable pauses, please forgive me. So, okay, so let's get into it. This is Secretary Essentials. And today you should be able, after the training is done today, you should be able to identify what your basic roles and responsibilities are as a secretary of the PTA. Understand what belongs in your minutes, how to write them, how to file them, how to get them approved, and understand why meeting minutes are important. We are going to do a little bit of review if you guys don't know these things. The PTA mission. Everybody needs to know and memorize the PTA mission. It is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate, being the keyword, for all children. You are, as a member of a board, as the secretary of the PTA, you have a responsibility, as do all the other officers, to make sure that the programs and the activities of your PTA uphold this mission and demonstrate the PTA values of collaboration, commitment, diversity, respect, and accountability at all times. The bylaws. The bylaws seem to be something that intimidates people, but they're pretty easy. They are the governing rules of your association and probably the single most important document in the PTA. They're a legal contract. They explain your purpose, your policies, your structure, that grants you the authority to conduct business in Virginia, and grants you subsidiary of Virginia and national PTA status. They define your association objective, your membership, officers and their duties, information about meeting requirements, including quorum, which I'll explain in a second, the composition of your board and your board structure, the nomination process, the elections process, vacancies, parliamentary authority, definition of committees, information about finances, amendments. I haven't been doing PTA for too long, but in my experience, the majority of the information, the majority of the questions that you have and that people will present to you can be found in the bylaws. So definitely read them. At minimum, read them thoroughly enough to know that you can at least find the information in the bylaws if you don't know the answer to a person's question offhand. There will be, just a side note, there will be, I know, an update to the bylaws coming since we just disbanded district PTAs. So expect an amendment to the bylaws to come this year or next year. If you have questions about your bylaws, you can always ask your president. You can definitely come to anybody in Fairfax County PTA My email is always open. You can come to me and ask me. The board. So this is defined in your bylaws, executive committee versus the executive board. But I'll go into a really quick explanation. Basically, so Articles 8 and 9 in your bylaws should give you the definition, but the executive committee is all of the officers of the PTA plus a teacher liaison plus the principal. Now, the executive board is generally all of those people on the executive committee plus all of the standing committees, the standing committee chairs. In the bylaws, it does say that the principal and the teacher liaison may serve on the executive board, but I don't personally know any place where they do not. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Kara.
Not really, you are correct. Usually we do have presidents or principals participate. A lot of times they just refrain from voting.
Okay, great. So general membership, most of the general membership items are described in the bylaws, such as frequency of meetings, what defines a quorum. A quorum, by the way, lots of people have this question, is the minimum number of members of an assembly that must be present at any of its meetings to make the proceedings of that meeting valid, which doesn't mean that you can't hold a meeting if you don't have a quorum. You can't just, some things such as voting, you cannot do without a quorum. Parliamentary procedure are a set of rules for conducting meetings. Most PTAs will use Robert's Rules of Order, but you are allowed to choose your own parliamentary procedure, and that should be defined in your bylaws. Your procedure book. So this is basically a list of documents that you need to have handy to conduct business day to day. It is recommended that every officer of the PTA have their own procedure book. So if your PTA does not have a secretary procedure book, recommend starting one immediately, and having all of these documents with you at every meeting. It will help, trust me. And they also need to be passed from secretary to secretary. So these things will typically include your tasks, what you're expected to do, what the secretary is expected to do, the standing rules, if you have them, a copy of the bylaws, past agendas and meeting minutes, any reports such as financial reports, the calendar for the school year, the PTA calendar for the school year, a membership list, which the secretary needs to maintain, and other things that you might want to add, like a contact list of members or volunteers, things like that. Okay. So the main part of the secretary's job is to manage and keep the records of PTA business and maintain correspondence as directed in your bylaws. The secretary is an elected officer and a member of the executive committee, and the records that the secretary keeps and the minutes that the secretary takes are permanent and legal official documents of your PTA. The secretary is the custodian of these records. And they are the meeting minutes. Well, all kinds of documents have their own expected retention rates. Meeting minutes need to be maintained forever. They should never get deleted or purged. And this is mandated by the Commonwealth of Virginia for all 501c3 nonprofit organizations. a question that we get asked a lot is, what if there is a gap? Because that happens a lot, unfortunately. The answer is, in part, just start immediately. Go through your bylaws, read them, follow them, start doing the meeting minutes, and make sure the meeting minutes are published, make sure the meeting minutes are approved, follow all the rules immediately. One thing that I'll mention really fast is, I don't know of too many PTAs who still operate this way, but sometimes there's a recording secretary and a corresponding secretary. Kind of a division of labor there, where the recording secretary would take like meeting minutes and things like that, and the corresponding secretary does a lot of communications things, perhaps the website. Maybe they'll send out emails and talk to the membership in different ways. If that is the case, then that should be defined in your bylaws. If not, again, define in your bylaws. Okay, next slide. So preparing for meetings, it will differ in each PTA, and you do have a little bit of wiggle room. But the basic things you need to do for every meeting: send announcements of PTA meetings to all invitees. Now, the president might be the one that's doing that, but you do need to work with them. You might be asked to work with the president to develop an agenda. In my PTA, for example, the president is the one that develops the agenda, but maybe it might be the secretary. And even if you aren't developing the agenda, you might be asked to send it out so that people can review it before the meeting begins. You might need to send out draft meeting minutes from the previous meeting, so people aren't trying to review them on screen and approve them during the meeting, because that's not really efficient. So what we recommend to bring to the meeting is, again, the procedure book, all the stuff that we just listed in the procedure book, bring to every single meeting, so that quick reference. Easiest thing for me, you can have a hard copy or a soft copy. Honestly, the easiest thing to do is to have a soft copy, and then you can just, search if somebody has a question. Okay. Okay, so meeting materials. Again, so in your procedure book, these things should be in your procedure book: your bylaws and your standing rules, your meeting agenda, minutes from the previous meeting, signed and approved minutes of previous meetings, correspondence and received and responses, a list of committee chairs and members, memberships list, motion forms, ballots, Robert's Rules of Order, calendars, materials. So everything that I mentioned before, to be in your procedure book, bring that with you. If your secretary is absent, the president will select somebody to take the meeting minutes for that meeting, and they are called the pro tem secretary. That also should be noted in the meeting minutes, that the pro tem secretary is the one taking the minutes. During the meeting, you need to take attendance. Check for a quorum. Generally, a quorum is 10 members, which includes the board. But again, that should be defined in your bylaws. At some point during the meeting, you will present previous meeting minutes for approval by the members. If corrections need to be made, the secretary will make the corrections, probably not during the meeting, probably after. And then after the corrections are done, they can be approved. During the meeting, you will record the minutes, count votes if a vote is to be made, and generally assist the president with whatever that they need. So when you're taking the meeting minutes during the meeting, meeting minutes should be succinct and to the point, and about what is being done in the meeting, not what is being said. So you don't need to write all these side conversations, these little back and forths, chit chatting. Oh, my dog, I had to take my dog to the vet the other. You don't need to write anything like that. Only actions taken. So if there was a vote and a motion passed or failed, those types of things that happened. If you're unsure of what is happening or what needs to be recorded, you can slow everybody down. You can ask the question, you can ask the president. It's very important that the secretary understands what is going on in the meeting at all times. Acronyms get thrown around a lot. You can ask, don't be shy. You need to understand what is going on in that meeting. If there is a motion, you need to write down the motion word for word exactly so it can be recorded accurately. And when you're doing meeting minutes, working off the agenda is the best bet. So you should have a template of meeting minutes, but also side by side working with the agenda, new business, for every new business, have a new paragraph and just follow along with the agenda. When the president calls to order, you write that down. When every officer presents their reports, you write that down. New business, write that down. Okay, so this is an example of motions. I move to approve the family fun event at Parkside Park for the dates of September 26th to the 27th, 2020, at the rate of $160.99 per night. Motion made by Sarah Jones and was seconded. Motion passed. One thing that they don't have in here is how many votes for and how many votes against. That is something else that you should be recording. Again, write down the exact language of the motion. If it was seconded properly, although Robert's Rules of Order states don't write down the name of the person that seconded the motion. But I don't think that you're going to be, there aren't any cardinal sins writing down the person that seconded the motion. If the vote was taken, if it was a standing vote, a show of hands vote, a ballot vote, how many votes for, how many votes against, which the secretary will count. The secretary is in charge of counting the votes. If the motion passed or failed, if there are any abstentions, if anybody refused to vote, and if a motion is withdrawn, you do not record, you just remove it from the minutes. Don't record this motion was withdrawn, wipe it completely from the minutes. So these are the things that minutes should include: the type of meeting, general or board, committee, etc. Name of your PTA, date, time, and place. Again, this is all made easier with a template. The time that it was called to order. So if it was scheduled for 7, but it wasn't called to order till 7:10, that still needs to be noted. Attendance, quorum. Attendance does get tricky in a virtual situation, but there are definitely ways that you can take attendance. Approval of prior minutes. Reports of officers. There would generally always be a financial report. And you can either say a report attached if they sent, if they emailed the report, or you can just say you can just write in the meeting minutes. For example, the secretary or the treasurer reported the balance of $24,000, something like that. Any motions, who made them, and everything that we just discussed about making motions, new business announcements, program information. Now, I think what they mean here is, Kara, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but do they mean program information, programs that you're conducting, or programs that you are that are coinciding with the meeting itself?
I think it's up to interpretation, but a lot of times what some, excuse me, what some presidents will do towards the end of the meeting is they'll go over what are the upcoming programs, what are the upcoming events. They provide kind of a snapshot of what's to come. And if the president is sharing that, it's good to include it in the meeting minutes.
Okay. And then the time of adjournment. Okay, the minutes should not include your opinions, obviously, personal comments, judgmental things, withdrawn motions, a list of separate amendments, and that means separate amendments to the motions. You know, fancy language, detailed reports, transcripts, conversations. And this is a little odd, but the person who seconds a motion, according to Robert's Rules of Orders, that you should not put their name. So just the main point here is make it succinct and professional. And do not include, there is a ton of talking done, and it's kind of difficult to weed through the conversations. Do your best. Nobody's going to get it right 100% of the time. Do your best to be succinct, to understand what's going on in the meeting and understand what is important. Okay. So some miscellaneous language. For example, if somebody arrived late or left early, this is only for attendance reasons and for ability to vote reasons, just in case there was a vote. If Mary Smith left at 7:35 and there was a vote at 7:45, she wouldn't have been able to. That's the only reason why we record things like that. Reports are very important. Again, you can just say presented a report, see attached. You don't necessarily have to type all of the details of the report in the meeting minutes. If there were breaks, record those, and if minutes were approved. Again, very, very important. The meeting minutes should be kept forever. They should be kept in a place where, you know, the incoming secretary can access them, all of the officers can access them, and all of the members can access them. They are permanent records of your association. Again, along with all of the written reports discussed in the meetings, including the treasurer's report, the membership rosters, the bylaws and amendments. So these records aren't just for the officers and the board, they are for all members. So it's up to you and your team to figure out how you are going to share them with your members. Website is a pretty popular way. You can do some file sharing. That's a little bit difficult, but these records need to be available to your entire membership. Now, after the meeting, you're going to obviously type up the minutes. You're going to attach any reports. You're going to provide a draft for review before the next meeting. Now, there's nothing that says a timeline. You have to have it done in 2 days. You have to have it done in a week. It's up to you and your team if you want to put hard limits on that. I personally think it's a pretty good idea to have the meeting minutes done in a week. Sooner, as soon as possible is obviously better. But you will have to add that to your standing rules yourselves. Again, the meeting minutes should be sent out before the next meeting to be approved. You don't want to present the meeting minutes that need approval for the first time at the meeting. That's impossible. Okay. So, key takeaways here. The secretary is the right hand of the president. Meeting minutes are legal documents and must be kept as a permanent record of the association. Minutes should contain notes on actions, not what is said. Approved minutes should be placed in the official file and made available as appropriate. The bylaws and standing rules in the procedure book have the specific description for the secretary of your PTA. The secretary has three main roles: recorder, correspondent, and record maintainer. So we will now open it up for questions. First, we will address, Kara, do you want to address the things in chat first?
Yeah.
And then we'll do verbal questions. Okay.
Yes. So most of the chat questions were handled. There weren't a whole lot, but
Okay.
we did have an interesting question towards the end. This has to do with taking attendance and keeping track of who's leaving. So just to clarify, you have to record if any PTA member arrives or leaves early. Do you like call them out as they're walking away to get their name, or how can we get this done?
Okay, so that's the next excellent question. No, we don't call it. That's not the purpose of doing it. It's more for, an attendance record and for voting, more importantly. You don't want to call them out. If we start embarrassing people, nobody is ever going to come. So, and we don't want to make anybody feel bad ever. So do your best. You have a lot going on all at once. You're listening, you're typing, you're watching, you're thinking. So do your best. There is a good Zoom function. You have to have a certain kind of account, but where you can print out a report. If you guys are using Zoom, you can print out a report of when people connect and disconnect to your meeting. So that's pretty helpful. You can take screenshots, but if you need to delete them after you take, you don't want people's faces. You don't want to keep that kind of stuff around. I take screenshots and then record, who's in the meeting. And that's, there are different kinds of ways to do it. The easiest way is to get the report from Zoom, but definitely don't call anybody out, please.
Yeah, I would say if it's live and you don't know who they are, just let them go, because that would be weird.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just wanted to share from a local units perspective, a lot of what Colleen went over, 90% of it, like, you won't really have to deal with. There's not a whole lot of motions made. There's not a whole lot of discussion and removal of amendments. And that kind of stuff happens like at the Virginia state level and above, but we adhere to the same guidelines. So most PTAs, a lot of this, you're going to be making motions to approve the budget, approve the minutes, adopt the summer financial review. That's going to be like 99% of your motions. And I also wanted to share best practices with the secretary taking meeting minutes. If you're able to draft it up, right, or even as you're drafting them that evening, I've seen secretaries send them out immediately after the meeting. Yeah, exactly. While it's still fresh in people's minds. I'm more likely to remember something that just happened than if you ask me 2, 3, 4 weeks later.
Exactly. Yeah. So as soon as possible is best. And that way, if somebody disagrees with anything disagrees with anything in your meeting minutes, it'll be all fresh in their memories too. So as soon as possible is best, but there's nothing in the bylaws about a time limit. If you want to impose a limit, then you put that in your standing rules.
So do you need to read the minutes for approval or just refer to the minutes that were previously shared via email or printout?
Yes, definitely. Like, you don't want to take up a meeting, reading the meeting minutes, putting them up on a screen and giving them 15 minutes to read it. No. I mean, if it's an emergency, then do that. But you just refer to the meeting minutes that you should have already sent out before the meeting. And then you ask, does anybody have any edits? No, yes, definitely do not take up time during the meeting to read it out loud.
Nobody's going to be listening.
No, exactly.
Do you send the draft to the board or to all members of the PTA?
So if you're doing, it depends on the attendance of the meeting. So if it was a committee meeting, you're going to send the meeting minutes out to the attendees, so the committee members. If it was a general membership, then all of the members. Even the members that weren't present, so all of the entire membership. If it was, an executive board meeting, then you send it to the executive board.
So someone says, I came in a little late, was taking action items covered. Does anyone take them, and how to keep track or address at following meetings?
That's a good point. So while that wasn't in this presentation, I recommend that the secretary takes action items and puts that a separate paragraph in the meeting minutes for action items. Most other people are just talking to each other and throwing out ideas, and that sounds cool. Okay, let's try that. And you will probably be the only person writing all this stuff down. And people have a tendency to forget what they were assigned. So I think it's very important that you take down the action items and put that in your meeting minutes.
And that can be addressed in the next meeting in the president's agenda by old business.
Right. So another thing that I do, again, it's how you're going to run your own PTA, but I will send out the meeting minutes, but in a separate email, I send out the action items. These are the action items from the meeting. So you have them because they might not review the meeting minutes for a few weeks. And then, so I send the action items in a separate email to everybody.
And by send out, posting the minutes to the website is an option.
Correct. Yeah. Email and posting them to the website, whatever you do, file share, whatever it is that you guys do. Yeah.
So what is an action item?
So an action item is something that you have to do. It's a task you were assigned, something you signed up for. You're the communications secretary. Can you please update the website with the new dates of the community day? So that is an action item. That communications person must update the website. It's just a task that you're assigned.
No new questions yet. However, I was curious, we threw around the word standing rules and bylaws. Does everybody know or does anybody not know the difference between bylaws and standing rules?
That's a good point. And that's another kind of confusing to people that are new, that gets confusing for people too.
So the bylaws now are universal. We have a universal bylaws. They were officially adopted over the summer. So I dropped a link earlier, and I'll include the link again when I send out the thank you for attending email. What is unique to the bylaws now is each PTA is responsible for submitting what's called a top cover sheet. And that top cover sheet lists things like how many officers you have, how many meetings you have per year, things, and what your quorum is, things like that. So everybody kind of has the same overarching bylaws right now. But your standing rules are kind of like, if you think of the bylaws as like school rules, principal rules, your standing rules are kind of your teacher rules, like what's specific to this classroom. So what is specific to your PTA? So standing rules might include things like If an officer doesn't show up for 3 meetings in a row and has no excuse, we can vote them out. A standing rule could be the secretary has to send out the meeting minutes within a week for approval. A standing rule could be every PTA volunteer is required to check their PTA email at least once a week and respond to emails. It's just a way to conduct business for your unique PTA. With standing rules, the people that approve them are the people that it's written about. So if I'm a president, I can't create a whole list of standing rules and give it to the rest of the leadership team and say, you have to follow these. That's not fair. So the standing rules, if we're having a standing rules for our officer team, then all of the officers need to agree on what those rules are. So that's standing rules.
Whereas bylaws are mandatory. Standing rules are not recommended, but not mandatory.
Does anyone have any other questions? Any terms that we threw out that you weren't sure what they meant or anything? It doesn't have to be secretary specific, it can be PTA related. We have a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. Any suggestions and resources for schools with a high percentage of non-English speaking families? Is anyone translating their minutes? Colleen, do you have any thoughts?
Wow, that's a tough one. So I'm wondering if does your school have a translator? If you have a high percentage of non-English speakers?
I have no idea.
So generally the school has resources because they're needed. So you can utilize those resources. There are some websites you can use to translate, but honestly, they're not very reliable. So I would be very judicious about what you choose. What is really good to do, if you can get volunteers from your membership to translate, ask for volunteers, maybe even start up a committee to translate things like meeting minutes, or, you could do the website, or, your pamphlets, any of your documentation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's a tough one. It's a really tough one. It's a struggle.
Yeah. So it looks like, go ahead, Colleen.
I was going to say Google Translate's got a good reputation, but even that, it's not super great. So just be careful. I think it'll translate it well enough for it to be understood. It's just, it might be a little bit clunky, but best bet is to have an actual person translate it for you. And those people are around, especially if you have, you have a large population of non-English speakers.
And one of the things that has worked for me in the past is we would ask for people to translate and nobody would translate. Everybody was too busy. When I started using Google Translate, they started getting upset because it was wrong. And I was like, oh, well, can you correct it for me? And then somebody else in here said they use Google Translate, and then they asked somebody to kind of review it and kind of clean it up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you for that suggestion.
So it looks like there's no more questions. I will send out a recording. I will upload the training to YouTube and give you that YouTube link. I will send out a copy of the slides. I will include the link to where you can find your universal bylaws. And then at any time, feel free to reach out to myself or Colleen if you have any additional questions. And if we're not the person that can answer it, we have a big team and we can find the person that can answer it for you.
Yeah, again, I'll just close with my email is always open. It's just secretary@fccpta.org. And I can send you, we have a lot of resources, so I can send you sample meeting minutes, the records retention policy, sample motion forms, that list of things that needs to be in the procedure book if you want like a separate list. So Oh yeah, definitely. I can send an example of meeting minutes. Can you take down her email, please?
I have her email.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's easy.
Colleen, if you want to get together a bunch of resources and just
Oh
send them
yeah,
to me, I'll send them to everybody who
awesome.
registered.
Then we'll
That
do
way
that.
everybody gets them.
Great, perfect. Okay.
So you can look forward to an email from me probably on Friday. I have some family stuff tomorrow, so no PTA work for me, but I will work on this Friday. So look for an email from vptraining@fccpta.org. It might not have my name on it. It might say Hamid Minyor. It might say Michelle Leet. Who knows what it's going to say, but look for that email to have all of these resources. All right, everyone, I'm going to stop
Great.
recording.
Thanks, guys.